Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We can all admire Cantor Kathy's new haircut and
hair dye
and longer legs, a taller stature. No, we're thrilled to have Kristen with us again. Cantor Kathy wimped out and ran away to Florida for a couple days. Couldn't handle the cold, but she'll be back soon. So it's wonderful to have Kristen here to lead us in our Shabbat music this evening. To have a number of our kids here for junior congregation. You'll be with us for the first few minutes of the service, and then we're going to kick you out so you can do your own kid thing with Lauren. So did everybody touch base? And Maggie. Maggie, will you raise your hand? So this is Maggie. Welcome, Maggie. Maggie's going to help us with junior congregation this evening. And she's talented in her own right, but we know Maggie, sort of know Maggie through Rob, who is one of our favorite people, and Rob Ross, who's been here many times. So welcome, Maggie. Thank you for being here. We'll begin with our prayer over our candles. You can find the prayer on page 2, and I'll begin with this reading on page 3, as we pray that God, as the source of light and truth, creator of the eternal law of goodness, help us find the knowledge by which to live. Lead us to take the words we shall speak into our hearts and our lives. Bless all who enter this sanctuary in need, all who bring the offerings of their hearts, and may our worship lead us to acts of kindness, peace, and love. We light our candles, page 2.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat.
On page 7, a prayer for this day. Where has this week vanished? Is it lost forever? Will I ever recover anything from it? The joy of life, the unexpected victory, the realized hope, the task accomplished. Will I ever be able to banish the memory of pain, the sting of defeat, the heaviness of boredom? God, on this day, let me keep for a while what must drift away. On this day, let me be free of the burdens that must return. On this day, Shabbat abide. Help me to withdraw for a while from the flight of time. Contain the retreat of the hours and days from the grasp of frantic life. Let all of us learn to pause on this day, to find peace on this day, to enter into a quiet world on this day. On this day, let Shabbat exist and abide in our lives. We take this time to look back through our week, much as that prayer asks us, to take account of the moments of hope and the moments of pain, to hold on to the moments of blessing, to let go of the burdens. As we welcome Shabbat, page 20, the words of Lechadodi, they invite us to separate that which should be left behind and to hold on to that which we want to keep on this special and sacred day for us. Page 20, please join us in the words of Lechadodi. During our last stanza, we'll rise, physically welcoming Shabbat into our sanctuary, into our homes for those who are joining us online, and most importantly, into our lives. Page 20, please join with us.
Shabbat nikabila דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. שמור וזכור בדיבור אחד, השמיענו אל המיוחד, אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, לשם טוב ותפילה.
Join with us. Lecha dodi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela.
לקראת שבת להוא נלכה, כי היא מקור הברכה, מראש מקדם בסוכה, סוף מעשה במחווה תחילה.
Lecha dodi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela.
התעוררי, כי בעורף ומאורי, אורי, שיעור דברי, כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה.
Lecha dodi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Please rise as we face our entrance.
בואי ושלום עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובזוהלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה, בואי חלם.
Lecha dodi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. We're going to invite our students, our kids, elementary school kids, to join Lauren and Maggie. They'll be right by those front doors if you want to go make your way out with them for your kids' activity and your kids' service. You can find them. The rest of us will continue page 26. Parents are welcome to stay with us. We just ask that you do pick up your children at the end of services. So page 26 in our prayer books, Hatzi Kaddish.
מקדש שמי רבה ביום דברותי בימליק מהותי בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בגלה ובזמן קריב ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ומעולמיה יתברך. ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתהלל ויתהלל שמי קדושה בריחו לילה מן כל בירתה בשירתה
תושבחתה ונחמתה דהמירון מעלמה ויאמרו אמן. Page 28. Page 30 and 31. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim. This is a time of change. We are here uncertain on the border of light as day turns to night. So too, El Chai V'Kayam, may we embrace life as we stand on this threshold. Tamid Yimloch Le'olam Va'ed, forever and ever. Baruch atah Adonai Hama'ariv Aravim. May we find blessing in this moment of change. May we not be afraid of it, but rather walk into it with hope and optimism and with love. Page 32 and 33. Please join with me at the top of the page. As you taught Torah to those whose names I bear, teach me Torah too. Its mystery beckons, yet I struggle with its truth. As you meant Torah for me, did you mean the struggle for me too? Don't let me struggle alone, but help me to understand, to be wise, to listen, to know. Lead me into the mystery. Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael. Page 34 and 35, Shema.
Shema Yisrael,
Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto,
Le'olam Vayeh.
Please be seated. We join together in V'ahavta, page 36.
Thou shalt love Adonai, thy God, with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And all these words which I command you on this day shall be in thy heart, shall be in thy heart. Thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children. Thou shalt speak of them when thou sittest in thy house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou risest up, and when thou liest down, and when thou liest down. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thy hand. They shall be for frontlets between thy eyes. And thou shalt write them on the doorpost of thy house, and upon thy gates, and upon thy gates, that ye may remember and do all of my commandments, and be holy unto your God, unto your God, unto your God.
Pages 40 and 41. We sing the song of men and women joined in understanding and respect, the song of God's miracles, an earth protected and cherished, a gift for our children and the generations to come. The song of a land once ravished by war, now quiet and content, her soldiers home to leave no more. The song of a world redeemed, a song of peace. Page 40, Micha Mocha.
Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha ne'tor b'kodesh, nora tehilot osefele, nora tehilot osefele. Chutecha rahu v'necha, v'keyam lifnei Moshe, Seili anu v'yamaru, Say
We have a somewhat of a tradition, as I'll pick on my wife a little bit. She tends to really like gifts that allow her to sleep somewhere. And so I've done my best Hanukkah and birthday gifts by giving gifts like a hammock, somewhere where she can go by herself and nobody will bother her and she can sleep. So this year, the gift was a heated blanket because we felt, she especially, was tired of being cold at night. And something we've realized is you turn the heated blanket on early so it'll be nice and warm when you get ready to go to bed. And yesterday, it struck us that it was like 4:45 when we wanted to turn the heated blanket on because it gets dark so early this time of year. We didn't even know what time, when you don't know what time it is. But it's dark outside and you've started to eat dinner maybe, and you say, I think it's time to go to bed. And we looked at the clock, it wasn't even 6:15, I think. And I have every year at this time sort of a love and appreciation for, despite perhaps I would call it countercultural. Many of us will complain about this time of year. It's too cold, it's too dark. I find it in some ways calming. It asks us to slow down a bit, to make our days shorter, to get in bed earlier. We could all probably use a little more sleep. And so I like the winter, at least parts of it, because the evenings are longer, and we enter into them sooner in the day, and I find that to be a peaceful time, a time for us to have a quieter time, and not be in the hustle and bustle of what I think of, even though I enjoy it also, of the longest days of summer where it's 9 o'clock and you haven't eaten yet because it didn't feel like dinner was supposed to happen until it started to get dark. We have this relationship. Shabbat helps us perhaps because for many of us, we've at times begun Shabbat as you're supposed to, traditionally, by when it gets dark. And it asks us to start it earlier and earlier in the winter, and not to feel as though that somehow is stealing something from you. It's not shortening your days, it's lengthening the time in which you can be with those people with whom you share a home, to reach out to, perhaps if you don't share a home with anybody, to those family members and friends who are closest to you, to use that time not to get exhausted, but to rejuvenate yourselves. And so that's my prayer at this time of year as we share the words of Hashkivenu. It says, I think poignantly on page 43, give us a place to rest, God, a shelter in the soft, long evening shadows of your truth. For with you are true protection and safety, in your presence are acceptance and gentle love. Watch over us, prepare for us as we return. We pray that you spread over us a shelter of your peace over all we love, over Jerusalem and yours. May we find that these long evenings, that they don't scare us, but rather they affirm the fact that we have a shelter around us, a place that we can find peaceful. I hope that's true for us all the days of our lives, but if not everyone, perhaps more often than not. Page 42, the words of Hashkivenu, a prayer for peace and shelter on this evening.
Hashkifenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom, leshalom. Behamidenu shamreinu lechaim. Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha, ufros aleinu
Please rise, page 46. As we begin our Amidah, we pray that God give us the ability to have the words that we need most, to open our mouths in praise, but also to open our hearts. As part of the Amidah are words given to us, but part of the Amidah is always words that we put out into the world that we need. Page 46.
Adonai, Safatai Tiftach, Ufi Agita Ilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu Imotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, El Hagadol, Hagibor Vanara, El Elyon, Gomer Chasadim Tovim, Vekonei Hakol, Vezocher Asei Avot Ve'imahot, Umevi Gula Livnei Vneihem, Leman Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Ozer Moshiach Umagen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magid Avraham ve'Ezrat Sarah. Atah Gibor le'olam Adonai, Mechayei hakol atah Rabbev Loshia, Mashiv haruach u'morid hagashem, Mechakel chayim bechesed, Mechayei hakol berachamim rabim, Zomech noflim ve'rofei cholim, Umatir asurim, Umechayim emunato, Lishenei afar, Micha mocha bal gevurot, Umidom elach, Melech menit umechayeh, Umatzmiach Yeshua, B'ne'eman atah l'chayot hakol, Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayei hakol.
Atah kadosh v'shimcha kadosh u'kdoshim b'chol yom yahalelucha sela Baruch atah Adonai, ha'el hakadosh. Please be seated. Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu b'amcha Yisrael. God, be with us in our prayer. Be with us in our love, and so too in our doubt. When doubt troubles us, when anxiety makes us tremble, when pain clouds our mind, we look inward for the answer to our prayers, and we ask that there we find you. And we ask that you offer us courage and insight and endurance, so that our worship bring us closer to one another, that all Israel and all who seek you may find new strength for your service. Baruch atah Adonai, she'otecha levadecha b'yirah na'avod. Our prayers for the greatest source of peace to find its way into every corner of our world. Page 60, Shalom Rav.
Shalom Rav, O Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav, O Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Leolam. Ki atahu melech Adon, Lecho HaShalom. Ki atahu melech Adon, tasim leolam, tasim leolam.
It's now time for those words that we write ourselves, our own personal prayers. We take a moment for our own personal reflection.
Say shalom bimroma, uyase shalom aleinu, veyakol Yisrael, bimru amen. Yase shalom, shalom aleinu, veyakol Yisrael. Yase shalom, shalom aleinu, v'yakol 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 Yisrael.
Having offered our prayers for peace in the world, we offer a prayer for those whose lives are torn by illness. Page 253, our words of Mishaberach. We share these prayers and we invite you to add names into the midst of the prayer as we offer our strength to those who are in need of it most at this time. Page 253, please join with us. Mishaberach avoteinu, kor habracha imoteinu.
May the source of strength, who bless
The ones before us, help us find the courage
to
make our lives a
blessing, and
Let us say, Amen. If there's a name you'd like to share, please share it as we look around the room. Mara Kay.
Sheberach imoteinu, makor habracha levoteinu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal
Shabbat Shalom. I had the great opportunity earlier today, along with Leslie and Moshe, who are here tonight, to hear one of the great Jewish leaders, scholars really, David Harris. He's the CEO of the American Jewish Committee, 30 years. His talk was titled 30 Years of Jewish Leadership. It was at the Cleveland City Club. David Harris, he has an incredible resume, as one might expect. For those who don't know about the AJC, it's an organization I'm hoping that we as a synagogue are going to partner with more often. Their mission is to enhance the well-being of the Jewish people in Israel, to advance human rights and democratic values in the United States and around the world. And they do great work, really focused on, in particular, anti-Semitism, how it is understood around the world, especially in relation to Israel. And I often find my attraction to them has always been that they tend to truly have a sense, largely because of David Harris's leadership, of truly going into the depths of these issues and not just sitting on the surface. We know this about lots of things: racism, anti-Semitism, sexism. It's easy to sort of use one-liners and put headlines on newspapers, but to truly understand what's at the core of these challenges, you need somebody to do some hard work, and I find the AJC often does that hard work and explains it, relates it well to those of us who aren't going to take a college course right now on anti-Semitism or Zionism. They really give us some depth. So, of course, David Harris, this very impressive person who's towards the end of his career, soon to retire. The title of his talk is 30 Years of Jewish Leadership, and he is introduced by the president of the Cleveland City Club, as I'm sure you've experienced when other dignitaries are introduced, a long resume of wonderful things that he's done. And I'll come back to that in a moment. That moment, you know, I occasionally am invited to local college courses and churches, and there's really there's no speaker that introduces me. Usually it goes something like this. We're so thrilled to have Rabbi Josh Brown from Temple Israel. Please introduce yourself. So there's no long CV and grand introduction for me. I have to introduce myself. And as in part because of what David Harris said today, and in part because he was being so nicely introduced, I thought about what I say about myself, and I reflected on three things. I introduced myself as someone who grew up in Atlanta, someone who grew up in a Reform congregation, and someone, in part to get a little bit of, make sure people are paying attention and get a little surprise out of people, somebody who attended a Christian high school. So why say these things about myself? I reflected on it this afternoon after our talk. Perhaps I tell people that I grew up in Atlanta because I want them to know that I came from the South, and somehow, especially being from Atlanta, it gives me some credibility to speak about race. I think you can disagree with me, but for my own telling of my own story, growing up in the South, you learn a lot about race history and racism. Growing up in Atlanta, you particularly learn a lot about the civil rights movement and often feel quite proud of Martin Luther King Jr. and the movement that really stemmed from that city. So I feel it. I say I'm from Atlanta. I don't ever explain it. I just say, I think what I want people to know is I know a little bit about race. I tell them I'm from a Reform congregation because I want them to know this has been my life. I didn't become Jewish or a Jewish expert by becoming a rabbi. I was a Jewish expert when I was 5 because I was active in my Reform congregation. That's been my whole life. That's who I am. And third, I went to a Christian high school. There's a whole backstory to that, but I share that because I want you to know I am at least somewhat credible to talk a little bit about Christianity because for 4 years I attended church every Thursday. So I share this because David Harris did he had a wonderful talk, as he always does. He's a wonderful speaker, and the type of learned person who never talks from notes. and who's able to just, as he was quoted afterwards, he's traveled the world extensively, and in the discussion, they invited me to a brief discussion afterwards with him. Somebody said, he had said he's been to 70 countries. Most of us have been to some countries. Few of us have been to 70, but David Harris is the type of person who goes to 70 countries and then knows the history of each of those countries and can talk about the history of those countries without looking at any book. So how does a person like that with 30 years of experience, after having been formally introduced, start his talk? He says, let me tell you how I grew up. Let me tell you who I am by telling you where I came from, not by telling you what I learned at Ivy League schools, and not by telling you what I've learned by being at the head of a major Jewish organization for 30 years. Let me tell you who I am by telling you my origin story. He says, my mother was a refugee, immigrated from the Soviet Union to France when she was a child, and then from France to the United States by way of some other countries when she was a teenager. My father, he was a refugee. Came from Eastern Europe also to the United States. And then later in life, as I went out into the world, I met my wife. She was a refugee, Jewish refugee from Libya, who then, after we were together, also immigrated to the United States. He used this as a pretext to say, this is why I am grateful for the United States. I don't take the Statue of Liberty for granted. I know what freedom means because I saw in my parents and in my grandparents how important it was to have been in so many countries in this world and then land on these shores. At one point, he had a number of good lines, but one of them was that essentially when my parents saw the Statue of Liberty, it was not on a tourist trip. It was because it gave them something. So, I tell all of this to you because in the time for question and answer, a Jewish man stood up. He declared himself. He says, I'm Jewish, and I, like most of the people in this room, have a family history like yours. We know what it means to come from immigrants. Most of us probably could tell a similar story to your own. And then he asked a rather pointed question, a topic for another day. David Harris did something, second surprise of the day, for me. He said, I take issue with something that you've said. I don't believe that you all have the same history that I do. And then he did something courageous. I think it's courageous, and many of you have experienced this too, and maybe you've taken this risk. He asked a question to everybody sitting there, 100 or so people in the room, much like this. He said, is anyone here, how many of you here have two parents who were refugees, not immigrants, two parents who were refugees? I don't believe, yes. Somebody here you might be able to answer. That's great. It takes a lot of courage for a speaker, not knowing what the audience is going to say when he knows what he wants the answer to be, to ask 100 people to respond. His point was to say, I don't remember, I don't think anybody raised their hand. If there was, it was one or two. His point was to say, you can't presume that your story is my story. Just because we're Jewish doesn't mean that we all have the same story. And when I use the word refugee and I talk about my parents, I have a specific thing in mind. So don't say that we're all the same. And he did that by asking everybody, first, how many people's parents, both of them, were refugees? We couldn't raise our hands. Then he asked, does anyone here have a relative who was a refugee from an Arab country? Libya, in fact. Now, I'll tell you, this is an inside joke that only those here will get. There were two people in that room who knew that he, as the speaker, was going to be surprised, because Moshe Zaruk was in that room. And so when he said, does anybody here have a parent who was a refugee and an immigrant from an Arab country, he expected absolutely no one would raise their hand. And he didn't see Moshe, unfortunately. Moshe was off in the corner. I don't know if you can mimic yourself here. Moshe was over there. His hand was up and he was snapping. He was snapping. He was saying, I am that person. He missed you, I know. So Leslie and I were not surprised, and David Harris was so unexpecting of anybody to raise their hand that he didn't even see Moshe when he was snapping. But this is all to say that I think there were two lessons from him, among the many, and none of this was the point of his talk. That was a whole other story. But two things that I think tie into what our message from the Torah is this week, which I'll share in a moment. One is, our origin stories' meaning for us as individuals can outweigh any money, any fame, or goals society may push upon us. He told us his origin story because he's a very smart man, very accomplished. And he could have done a lot of things, but he made his life working for refugee rights, for Jewish rights, for Zionist rights, not because it would pay him more money and not because it would give him more fame, but because that was, as we would say, in his kishkas. That was more important to him because that's where he came from. And so he works. I bet he would say that it hasn't felt like work because his passion is from his origin story, which is why he knew as soon as that man said, we're all the same, he said, you can't be the same. My story's my story. You can't claim my story. So the first thing is our origin stories, they have the ability sometimes to be some of the most important parts of our life, to make us do things that society can't force us to do. Second thing, they're ours. They're unique to us. Ours to interpret, ours to use. But we can abuse them. We can put them onto other people, force them into other people's stories. Even when we think the dates and the locations are all the same, we can presume that that other person, because the map looks the same for them, that their life must be mine. We can't use our stories to define someone else. The stories that can be the most impactful for us in our life may be totally different for someone else, even if everything in the story seems to be identical. So how do we know this week? We're in the story of Joseph. Joseph has become famous. He's become wealthy. And his brothers and his father, who he's been separated from because they threw him into a pit many years ago, have become hungry because they're in the second year of a 7-year famine. His brothers unknowingly go to Egypt where Joseph is. They look him in the face. They don't recognize him. And he sees his brothers who abused him. And as the Torah reads this week, as follows. After playing some tricks on them, he could no longer control himself, and he cried out, "Everybody get away from me except for these men." And he said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still well?" But his brothers could not answer him. They were so dumbfounded, that's the translation actually in the Torah, on account of him. He tells them his origin story. He says, "I'm Joseph, your brother." They were there for his origin story, and they can't believe it. So he says it again. "Come closer to me," he says. "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt." Now, we stop the story there, and the most obvious next chapter is he, a person of power, looking at the brothers who abused him, takes great vengeance upon them. And I presume that's what they thought. But that's not what he does. He saves them. He embraces them because he interprets his origin story differently than they do. He says, in fact, this was meant to be. This did something good. I was put here to save the rest of my family, so go get my father, your father, bring him and your family here, and without that pivotal moment in the Torah, our people never survive, and Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy are never written. Joseph has it all: wealth, power, fame. He has the chance to lash out at his brothers, but his origin story is not one of anger, it's one of liberation. It defines him not as the abused brother, but as a man longing for his family and willing to save them. And for his brothers, I always imagine them in shock. They knew what he did to them, and now he's in control. But he liberates them instead. Our origin stories are incredibly powerful. They allow us to be who we are today, perhaps more than anything else. And when used correctly, they can bind us to other people. They can connect us to people who have different stories. Or they can blind us from what those stories are. It struck me that as David Harris was speaking earlier today about how powerful and moving it was for his parents to come to America, that there are many who look back on their family immigration and how they came to America, and it's incredibly painful. Can we hear those stories and understand them? Can we allow our stories to help define us? Can we come to know them? We won't know until we share our story and listen for others. I pray that when that day arrives for each of us, I hope it's a day when we can see each other as individuals, as brothers, as sisters, all at once. May our stories unite us. May they liberate us. May they inspire us to be a people for whom our ancestors and our God would be proud. May they be pivotal moments pushing us towards the future, allowing us to continue the age-old story of our people as we read in Torah this week. Amen. Continue in our service. Page 282 with the words of Aleinu. Please rise.
I apologize, everybody. I chose
bottom part of the page.
I chose the wrong part of the page. I apologize, everybody. We're going to start that over.
You got it.
Aleinu l'shabbat l'adon hakol, l'tet k'ruah yotzei breshit, shelo asanu k'goyei haratzot, v'lo samanu k'nishpachot ha'adama, shelo samchokenu kayat, v'goraleinu k'hol hamona, v'hanat milkorim, u'mishtachavim u'modim, l'ifnei melech, shmalchei hamachim, hakadosh baruch hu.
Page 287.
V'ne'emor, v'haya Adonai, v'melech kol haaretz,
Bayom ha'u, bayom ha'u, yeh Adonai echad, u'shemo, u'shemo, u'shemo. Please be seated. It's been unfortunate that we've had so many losses in these last weeks. We continue to read and share the names of those that we've lost in the last month. For some of us, these are members of our community who sat in these chairs, and for others, these are sisters and brothers and family members who had moved away, but for whom Akron was home for a long time. We turn our thoughts now to those families that are in mourning, To the people who are suffering during this time of loss, and who experience that void of missing a person who was a regular part of their life. This week, we remember Jerry Mallon, Nancy Sweedler Scalzitti, Cindy Singer, Helen Siegel, Stanford Regal, Jerry Reven, Christina Hoffman, Lisi Calderon, and Henry Zuchengo. We add to their names Maxwell Ellick, Robert Goldsmith, Melba Gould, Seymour Kaplan, Robert Cass, Isidore Kaufman, Jean Kay, Eileen Klein, Lillian Landskroner, Donald Lushtag Sr., Dr. Noah Miller, Mary Myers, Philip Noble, S. Palachuk, Elaine Rosenfeld, Phyllis Seidman, Bennett Teitelman, Preston Tushman, Martha Weiner, and Joseph Wolf. If there are names that you would like to share, please share them. Page 294, we share in the words of Mourner's Kaddish. Please rise. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, v'alma divrach yerutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uv'yomechon, uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, b'gala uv'izman kariv v'imru, amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevarach le'olam olmei almaya, yitbarak v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudesha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tush b'chata v'nechamata, damiran b'alma v'imru, amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. Osei shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us, to all Israel, and to all the world as we say, amen. Having connected with those that we love and lost, we offer these words of the priests over each other. May God bless you and keep you. May God's light shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May you feel God's presence within you always, and may you find peace.
Amen.
Remain standing as we invite our children up. Any of the kids who were a part of our junior congregation, we invite you up to help us bless Kiddush and Motzi. So come stand up here on the bima with us. If you'll come go over there and stand right by that table. We'll join together in Kiddush. Please join with us.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzo banu b'shabbat kodsho v'ahavu ratzon hikleanu zikaron le'maseh Bereshit, ki hu yom tahila, lamikraye kodesh, zehir zimayim, ki vandu v'charta, yotandu kidashta, mikol amim, v'shabbat kol shecha, v'ahava uvratzon, ikotanu, baruch atah Adonai, mikadesh ha-shabbat, amen.
All right, we'll join together in Motzi.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen.
Please be seated. It's an honor to invite Susan Kushner-Benson as a representative of our board to share some announcements with us.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We have some exciting things coming up in the next couple weeks. Sisterhood is meeting in downtown Akron on December 16th and touring two very exciting but limited exhibitions. On December 24th, Shabbat services will be online only. Please join us using your favorite online platform. Campership Fund, kind of exciting to think about sending kids to camp and nice weather again. Applications are due by January 10th. The David M. Horowitz Campership Fund can defray up to 1/3 of a family's financial responsibility of sending their child to a URJ camp. And finally, Sisterhood is selling 2022 Mahjong cards. Orders need to be submitted by January 18th. And of course, all of this information is repeated in the weekly temple email with links should you want to get more information or register. And maybe I'll get kicked off the board if I say this, but I'm going to give my own special announcement because my child, Abby Kushner-Benson, will be returning from her study abroad in Thailand a week from Thursday. And I know lots of folks ask me, when's Abby coming home? So I'm just going to share that with you. We're very excited. Shabbat Shalom.
We're all very excited. I think it might become a local Jewish holiday when Abby returns back. We've all been following her travels and greatly look forward to her being back here. And hopefully, if she agrees, we'd love to have her share some of her journey with us. So hopefully there'll be a day when we can do that. We'll close page 353 with Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu. Please feel free to stand as we'll share together and enter into the Shabbat with words welcoming peace into this day for us. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu.
Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu ve'akulam. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu ve'akulam. Salam Aleinu ve'akulam. Salam, salam, salam Aleinu ve'akulam. Salam, salam.
Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.